Welcome to One Planet Conservation Awareness. Today, we're going to be exploring the world of sea turtle conservation. We are lucky enough to be joined by two amazing projects from either side of the world. We have Nikki from the Latin American Sea Turtle Project in Costa Rica and Tom from Juara Turtle Project in Malaysia. We'll be looking at the similarities and the differences between the two projects, working to protect sea turtles in two different countries. Now, having worked previously in Malaysia protecting sea turtles myself, Tom, we'll start with you. So perhaps you can give yourself a bit of an introduction and introduce us to the species of sea turtles you guys are working with in Malaysia.
So the Juara Turtle Project is obviously based in Malaysia. I took over the project this year as the general manager. We predominantly have green turtles here. We do occasionally see some hawksbills as well. And on the very, very rare occasion, we do also get olive ridleys. We've been here for the last 15 years now. So we're a pretty well-established project, but that doesn't mean we don't have problems.
And we'll be exploring those problems and also those solutions in a little bit. Perhaps, Nikki, you can introduce yourself and tell us the different species you're working on in Costa Rica.
Okay, well, I'm Nikki. I work for Latin American Sea Turtles, a non-profit NGO here in Costa Rica. We focus on research and conservation of 3 different species. So we have different projects. We have a leatherback nesting project where we're looking at the nesting dynamics of adult female leatherback turtles. This nesting beach also sees loggerheads, green turtles, and hawksbills. So we're extremely lucky to be able to work with 4 different species on one beach. And then we also have an in-water study. Generally turtles only spend about 1% of their life on their nesting beaches, and the rest of the time they are in the water. So we decided to do an in-water study to look at their foraging habitats and behavior. And in this project, we are studying the hawksbill turtles and the green turtles. Okay, so we're working with different species, both in the land, on the water, and it's not just about the conservation. We need to develop conservation strategies using our research.
Now, you've mentioned a few of the different species, and there's 7 species of sea turtles in the world, all with their special quirks and habits, but they also share some amazing similarities in sea turtle natural history. So perhaps you could both tell us some fascinating things about sea turtles and why you love working with them so much. So Tom, perhaps you can hit us with one of your favorite turtle facts to start with.
I think one of the most impressive things about sea turtles is their life cycle. As I say, we've been working here for the last 15 years, and the baby turtles that we've released still won't have reached maturity and will be off in the middle of the ocean somewhere or in a completely different part of the world, thousands of kilometers away. And when they sort of reach 20, 25, 30 years old, something flips in their brain and the GPS kicks in and they make their way all the way back to their nesting beach and start the cycle all over again. And there's no maps, no road signs underwater. They just know how to do it. It's an absolutely incredible natural phenomenon.
Nikki, perhaps you can give us a bit of insight into why you love turtles so much and something that you find fascinating about the life of the sea turtles.
Well, I would have to talk about leatherbacks because the leatherback turtle was the very first turtle I ever saw in my life. I've never seen a sea turtle until I saw a leatherback. And when you see one of these huge animals, they're kind of like dinosaurs, and they have been around since the dinosaurs. So they're pretty impressive. The leatherback itself can hold their breath for about 6 hours. They can also dive down about 1,000 meters. So that's a kilometer deep in the ocean looking for their food, and their main food is jellyfish. So they're kind of cool. They have a soft shell, which is a little bit different to the rest of the turtles. Their shell they're called a leatherback for that reason. Their shell kind of feels a little bit like leather. And also they have like a gland on the top of their head that helps them to kind of situate themselves during their migration. So as Tom mentioned, when they migrate these huge distances, they do have kind of almost a GPS system on their head in the shape of a gland. And we can also ID each leatherback because of this gland, because each pattern of this gland on their head is completely different. So there's many things like this, little facts that are really interesting about leatherbacks.
I think sea turtles are one of those groups where you can talk for hours about all the amazing different aspects of their natural history. Tom, perhaps you could give us an insight to why different turtles are so important for their ecosystems. I know each species has a slightly different role, but perhaps you can tell us about the green turtle and the hawksbill turtle in Malaysia and their different roles within the ecosystem.
Well, as you said, they each play their own specific role. They tend to focus on one type of food. When they're young, they'll eat a little bit of everything, but as they mature, they tend to focus on one specific food group. So greens eat mostly seagrass. They basically act like little underwater cows going along and munching all the grass, keeping that in check, which is an important natural kind of binding material which holds all the sand in place. Then you've got hawksbills, which will eat soft corals and sponges, which are organisms that compete for space on coral reefs. So coral reefs themselves are one gigantic living mass that's made up of all sorts of different things, but all of those individual items are competing for space. And if one particular species or genus of coral starts to overtake, it can have a detrimental effect. So soft corals compete with hard corals, which are actually the most important building block for coral reefs. And the hawksbills go along and chew those up and make sure that everything's kept in balance. They really are keeping everything in check. That's why they're so important.
And the sea turtles are often referred to as the gardeners of the sea, both for the seagrass and the coral reefs, maintaining these systems and allowing them to maintain their ecosystem services like carbon capture and also creating habitat for other species. Now, turtles across the world are facing many threats from climate change, plastic pollution, and unfortunately the overharvesting of both their meat and their eggs. But perhaps you guys can tell us a little bit more about the threats that you guys are dealing with in the countries you work in. So Nikki, we'll start with you. What threats are sea turtles facing in Costa Rica?
Well, I think especially on the nesting beaches, for example, yeah, human predation and poaching is still a massive issue. And although it is illegal, the laws are very rarely actually implemented within these rural communities where turtles are nesting. And we are seeing now, due to the pandemic, where many people have lost their incomes, many people need a protein source to feed their families. And we're finding that the poaching of eggs is becoming more and more. People are returning to their old habits. So in spite of education efforts over the last 10, 15 years, people are starting to return to those bad habits because they don't have many other options. So, conservation very much goes hand in hand with social issues in that respect. But also in our in-water study, we're seeing a lot of problems, not just with plastic pollution, but with ghost fishing gear. People that discarding their fishing lines, fishing nets, fishing hooks, and turtles become caught up on it. And once they get tangled, it's very difficult for them to escape from. So I think in both areas, I think there are two main problems: is predation and poaching on nesting beaches, and turtles in the water are suffering a lot from getting caught up in ghost fishing gear.
And Tom, can you give us an insight into the similarities, but also the differences of these similar issues that you're working with in Malaysia?
Yeah, so obviously we do have problems with entanglement, and there is still egg poaching in Malaysia, but locally here, it's not that much of a threat. The main problem that we have here is beach development. So Tiaman Island is an up and coming tourist destination. I must admit, not so much at the moment, obviously due to travel restrictions, but things like new restaurants, new hotels, all wanting to be on the beachfront, which means that they're removing the vegetation in front of the beach, which is a problem on two separate fronts. That it is the area where turtles generally tend to lay their nests. But also this year we had a very heavy monsoon with a lot of strong waves, and we've seen areas where the beachhead has been completely eroded because there's not the vegetation binding all the sand together. And obviously all these new developments are bringing things like light pollution, generating extra trash and things like that. Light pollution is probably our biggest problem here. We see it when we do our releases at nighttime, that the baby turtles are actually drawn towards these artificial light sources instead of heading out straight into the open ocean. So we do campaigns with local people, local restaurants, try and raise awareness, provide different light sources, orange lights and things to try and lessen the impact of local light sources.
I think something that's very fascinating in the world of sea turtle conservation is the differences that are so localized often. And something, Nikki, you were mentioning the poaching of eggs in Costa Rica. Now, the islands of Malaysia avoid this. However, on mainland Malaysia, there is still a legal trade of turtle eggs in the country. Now, this, on top of all of the other issues, is pushing sea turtle populations down and down. Now, Tom, perhaps you can give us a very brief introduction to quite a difficult topic of how the tender system works in Malaysia and how this legal turtle trade is organized.
I must admit, it's not something that I personally have a lot of experience with, but the egg trade is, there's no federal law. It's all governed state by state. And there are areas where individuals can purchase a license to be able to harvest turtle eggs to then be sold for consumption. In some states, the actual removal of the eggs is illegal. In some states, the consumption of eggs is illegal. And it does mean that then there's this kind of interstate trade from places where it's slightly less illegal to places where it's slightly more. It's something that we do need national recognition of the issue and hopefully a bit more enforcement of as well.
And of course, these local issues are also confounded by global issues such as climate change, which unfortunately affects turtles a lot due to a quite special part of their natural history with the sex determination. So turtle eggs, the sex is determined by the temperature of the sand. And as this temperature increases, there's more and more females are being produced. So it's clear that these sea turtles have a lot going against them, but thankfully there's lots of projects like you guys out there working to protect them. So let's focus on some of these solutions. Nikki, you mentioned before some of the research you do, but maybe you can expand on this and talk to us a little bit about how LAST goes about protecting the sea turtle populations.
Well, our whole idea is, collecting data from our foraging and nesting sea turtles will enable us to form a long-term strategy. Currently where we work, there's no category of official protection. So our nesting beach is not protected by law. We're not in any kind of refuge or reserve, so it's a public area. So what we hope to achieve in the future with the amount of data we're collecting is to present this to the government and to prove that we need these areas to have some form of official protection. Okay. Once we are in a protected area, then our job becomes much easier. The turtles will be safer. So we're trying to do this on the Caribbean side to make this nesting beach, which is a very dynamic nesting beach for the leatherbacks, to make this a protected area in the future. On the Pacific side, where we're working in water, we are actually developing a regional strategy. So we're working with other organizations from El Salvador, from Nicaragua, and from Guatemala. And we're all working together in a regional area for the protection of the hawksbills, most importantly, as they are classified in this part of the world as critically endangered. So in this case, our research is collecting DNA samples. We're collecting tissue samples from the turtles to form a population database in this area of the world. And in this way, we can look at where their rookeries are, we can look at where their foraging grounds are, and we can form a conservation strategy not just to protect their nesting beaches, but also to protect their biological corridors that they use to travel between these two areas. So this is kind of where all of our research is focused on.
So using research to really power your conservation and inform those that make the rules as well.
Yeah, exactly. It's all about getting to the decision makers with the correct, accurate information.
Perfect. And Tom, can you give us a bit of an insight into what Juara Turtle Project get up to in Malaysia and how you guys are working to protect the sea turtles out there?
Yeah, we are doing our own research. We are doing some stuff with nest temperatures. So we're actually burying temperature sensors in the nests to try and get a better idea of you were talking about the temperature deciding gender. So by making sure that our nests are getting the right temperature, we can hopefully then make sure that we're not getting too high a skew of males or females, that we're actually getting a good 50-50 split. And we're also doing some stuff with photo identification. So the facial scales on turtles are all individual. There's no two turtles that have the same face. So we're able to scuba dive and free dive and take photos of both sides of the face. And then we put that into a database. We've got a special piece of software which helps us map out all the individual scales. And we can then compare photos that we've taken of different turtles or the same turtle and see whether these turtles are only here for nesting season, if they're here all year round, document what they're actually doing, whether they're feeding or nesting or mating. And again, produce a database that we can then share with the authorities. The Department of Fisheries in Malaysia is the governing body for sea turtles. So hopefully, although we are already a marine park, hopefully we can try and get some more enforcement and more protection for the area that we're working in.
I think for me, when I was working with sea turtles in Malaysia, one of the nicest things was to be able to get to know the turtles a little bit. By knowing which individuals they are, you kind of get to know a bit about them. You start to see some kind of personality. Some of them are pretty
behavioral patterns. Yeah.
So it's really nice research to be able to get to know the animals you're working with. Now, sea turtles are often described as an umbrella species, and protecting sea turtles not only protects that species, but all of the ecosystem that they inhabit. Now, working with sea turtles, we often have to involve local communities. So perhaps you guys can tell us how you involve communities and how you persuade them that it's worth protecting turtles. Nikki, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, this is fundamental to be able to do conservation work. Is you have to involve local communities and local authorities. You know, we can't just turn up and say we want to do this. You've got to work together. You know, we have a really nice program on the Caribbean side where we are using members of the local community who are all poachers. They all historically have poached eggs. And we're using them and their knowledge to help us train volunteers and to be our local guides. So when volunteers participate in the project, part of the funds that they pay will go towards paying local salaries for local people. So we're recruiting people in the community. We have a big program where they commit to conservation rather than taking eggs for consumption or for sale. So they're actually doing exactly the same thing as what they've always done, but for a different cause. And they have so much knowledge, you know, to share. They know where to find the turtles, they know where the eggs are, they know how to dig them up, you know, so they have this amazing knowledge that they've you know had passed down through generations. So we need to use that for our benefit and for conservation. So yeah, thanks to participating volunteers, we can pay local salaries to local people to help us in the project and kind of give them a bit of a switch over from poaching to conservation. And it works. We have many people in the community now that are full-on turtle conservationists that wouldn't dream of now consuming an egg when historically that's what they've always done. On the other side of the country, we involve the local community by giving them, we work in local schools. Environmental education is so important, and to get them when they're kids and to teach them about their environment. And we also provide income to the local community using their services that they provide. So housing and food services for volunteers, our boat captains, our fishermen. So we hire the boat locally. We don't have our own boat. To go out and do our turtle monitoring. We buy all of our supplies for the project locally. So this is our way of keeping the income within the community.
And it is always the case that the locals know best and are always the experts. And that's something I found very interesting working in Malaysia, especially with the older generation who remember when leatherbacks used to be in Malaysia as well. And they talk about stories of when they were children and there used to be thousands of turtles nesting on the beach. Tom, perhaps you can tell us a little bit about how you guys work with the community, and in particular, tell us a little bit about your plastic awareness program.
Yeah, so we operate very much in the same way as Nikki. It's nice to hear that we're all on the same page. We employ local people. We do have a couple of reformed poachers that work as our egg collectors. We do outreach and education programs with the local school. We also do with international schools as well. We try and get kids from schools all over Malaysia down here to learn about turtles. But yeah, over the last 4 years, we've been developing a recycling program within the village. So we collect recyclable materials from 25 locations around the village. So that's a lot of businesses, hotels, but then we've also built little collection centers. And every week we go around and we pick up plastic, metal and glass recyclables and take them to our little recycling center. Not last year, 2019, we purchased a precious plastic machine. I don't know if anybody's ever seen or heard of these, but a brilliant little series of machines that's all kind of made into one unit that shreds, melts, and then reforms plastic into usable items. So we make souvenirs and stuff out of it to sell in our little gift shop. And then we also collect aluminium cans and ordinary plastic bottles that we can then ship off to the mainland to try and reduce the amount of trash that this small island actually has to try and cope with in the first place.
And of course, recycling and collecting all this material doesn't just help the turtles, it helps the whole marine ecosystems and even the local humans that are eating those fish as well. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm going to give you guys an opportunity to tell us how people can support your projects. And Tom, I see behind you, you have Adopt a Nest and Adopt a Hatchling. Perhaps you can tell us a little bit about
conveniently placed.
how people can get involved and how they can support your project.
Yeah, so we do have some adoption programs. People can pay to sponsor a nest. We then make up a little message board with whatever the sponsor wants. A message of good luck or whatever, and then we'll actually take photos of the nest when it hatches and the babies being released with their little message board. Send them information on the nest, how many successful babies actually made it out the nest. We've also got Adopt a Hatchling. Sorry, wrong side. That way. Where people can name turtles. We have a volunteer project. Obviously, at the moment, international travel and even travel within Malaysia is not that easy at the moment. So hopefully later on in the year, people will be able to come visit us. The other thing is, again, that side, our fundraising campaign. We've been trying to generate funds through the internet, and we've had really great response from a lot of our internet community, and they really have helped us through a very difficult patch at the end of last year. Fingers crossed, finance is not going to be as difficult again this year, maybe. But yeah, everyone's donations are really welcome and will really help the project stay alive through these difficult times.
That sounds great. And I hope that people listening to this would love to support your work and help you guys out. Nikki, same question to you. How can people get involved and how can they help you guys continue your work?
Yeah, I think as Tom said, if people are in a position to be able to donate, these very small non-profit organizations are really struggling. Many people don't have any government subsidies, so we're struggling to survive. So donations always help. Recurring donations, $10 a month helps no end, and we can put that to so much good use. We also have the adoption programs. We can adopt a big turtle, an adult turtle, we can adopt a nest, and we can adopt hatchlings. But also social media campaigns, follow us on social media, follow these nonprofits, because, that helps us spread awareness. It helps us get our word out, get the word out about what we're all doing here. So, following campaigns and sharing information is a really good way to help if you're not in a position to donate or volunteer. Luckily, Costa Rica is open. We're open for business. Leatherback nesting season starts in 2 weeks. So people are more than welcome to come over in 2 weeks' time and help us with the construction of the hatchery and doing night patrols. And our in-water program is open all year, and Costa Rica has no travel restrictions.
Sounds great. Well, unfortunately, we have run out of time, and I'm sure we could all talk about turtles for days and days, as they are such incredibly fascinating group of animals. But for anyone watching who wants to find out more about these two amazing projects, you can check out their websites and their social media pages, and keep an eye out on social media for any updates or ways in which you guys can help. So Nikki and Tom, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll be in touch soon, and keep up your good work, especially in these hard times.
Thank you,
very much.
Jordan.